Hey guys, Treepscore here, and today I'm going to be giving you my thoughts on Mirror's Edge Catalyst. Mirror's Edge is a sandbox parkour-based first-person action game developed by EA DICE and is bizarrely a reboot of the 2008 game before it. You still play as Faith, whose name I should desperately try not to use as a pun in this review, but this is an alternative version of the character who you take control of after a short intro video where she is released from prison for an unknown offence. Once released, she is almost immediately reunited with her runner brethren, who are essentially the UPS of the rooftops, whose method of delivery is parkour. She is then caught up in a fairly subpar plot with a number of unmemorable characters and also learns about her troubled past. The previous game wasn't hugely impressive in terms of story and characters, and the sequel/remake certainly follows suit. The original Mirror's Edge was mostly known for being the first game to truly nail first-person parkour mechanics later used in games like Dying Light, and although it was critically well received, it didn't exactly set the world on fire in terms of sales. It did, however, develop a strong following over the years, and there was a high demand for a sequel to be made. 8 years later, Mirror's Edge Catalyst has finally hit the shelves, and it's a bit of a mixed bag. The first game was very much a linear narrative-focused action game where you constantly felt a sense of urgency. Each level felt vastly different and was designed in a way that made them great fun to replay. Catalyst, however, throws this approach out of the window and instead opts for the so hot right now sandbox style of gameplay. All of the tropes that come with this genre are included. You have your upgrade system where you can gain new abilities and gear, some of which are just stripped from the first game, like the ability to quick turn, and the rest are things like do more damage to enemies or climb things faster. There is also a ton of filler crap in here, the majority of which revolves around finding endless amounts of computer chips and glowing orb-like things scattered all over the glass city. These aren't even hidden and are mostly in plain sight. Aside from a tiny sliver of XP, they are utterly pointless and are just there to draw out the game's runtime for completionists. There are also a number of side quests, the majority of which involve running from A to B before the time runs out, and there are a few other more story-based missions which unlock things like fast travel. Although if you're hoping for a Witcher level narrative in the side missions, then you're going to be greatly disappointed. There is also a multiplayer element where you can create routes and share them online. These appear all around the game world and you can compete to beat each other's times. If you do intend to take part in these or do the time trial side quests, I would recommend waiting until you unlock some of the movement upgrades. The combat has also been tweaked from the original game. You can no longer use guns or disarm enemies, instead you have a heavy and light attack. You can also dodge and use your environment to amplify the damage of kicks. It works quite well for the most part, especially with weaker enemies where you feel like a badass kicking them through windows and over ledges. Later on though, when you face tougher enemies, the combat shows its weakness and the lack of moves or ability to counter can make the fights drag out. Also the physics when you do take enemies down can sometimes cause unintentional hilarity. Mercifully, you can skip some of the fights later on in the game by just running past the enemies. There is also a wanted system in place when free roaming. This can be activated by attacking set objectives around the game world or from being caught by a security camera. For the latter, even if you do set the alarm off sometimes, enemies don't even spawn. Even when they do, the AI squads are so inept and easy to take down they don't really pose much of a threat. To lose your wanted level, you can either go to a safe house or run far enough away that they will end the pursuit. As far as the main story campaign goes, I found it to be surprisingly good fun with some good level design and some really impressive set pieces. The sandbox just seems to be there solely to appeal to the masses, and if they'd just stuck to the original structure, the game would have been much better for it. Two things which thankfully have stayed intact with Catalyst is the parkour and the visuals. The free running feels as smooth as ever and is just as satisfying. The same can be said for the visuals, which are quite breathtaking at times. The so-called City of Glass certainly lives up to its name and is full of bright colours and stunning interiors, although it does feel incredibly empty as there are very few NPCs roaming around. It feels very odd walking around a huge rooftop bar in broad daylight with not a single person in sight. Performance-wise, I did encounter some major issues with running the game on the highest texture settings and with SLI enabled, where it either crashed or the frame rate dropped into the 20s. I played with everything on max but with ultra textures and 1440p, and it was mostly sitting around the 50 to 60 frames per second mark on my single 980 Ti. People seem to be very upset with the direction of the series. On Metacritic, the game currently has a 3.6 user score on PC, which is mostly due to people thinking that the game doesn't live up to the original, so they go and give it a 1 or a 0 out of 10, which is a bit pathetic really. Yes, the sandbox approach was a poor design choice, yes the game has many faults, but it is not Ride to Hell Retribution or Raven's Cry or Aliens Colonial Marines level bad. At its core, it's a slightly above average action game with great visuals and a decent single player campaign. I personally didn't bother with the filler stuff, focusing on the main campaign and the core side missions, and had a good time with it. It certainly doesn't live up to the original, not by a long shot, but if it was released under a different name, separate from the Mirror's Edge franchise, I'm sure it would have been received far better. If there was one major point where Mirror's Edge completely lost me, it was the ending. Without giving away any spoilers, there is no real final boss or conflict, and the finale was essentially a long cutscene which had an open ending that acted as one big setup for a sequel. Considering the game's very mixed reception, which will likely be reflected in the sales, there's a lot of doubt over whether or not we'll even see another game in the series, which makes the finale even more infuriating. Overall, I'm going to give Mirror's Edge a 6 out of 10. Despite having some great set pieces and stunning visuals, the poorly implemented open world approach and lackluster story make it a hard game to recommend at full price for anyone who isn't in desperate need of some more Mirror's Edge. If you are a fan of action games, then it is worth a gander, but I'd wait for a sale. And that's it from me. If you've liked this video, please let me know with a like and subscribe, or a dislike if you thought it was rubbish. Thanks very much for watching, and hopefully see you on the next one.